Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another session of the Doctor's Lab. And we're glad to be back. And apologies for the radio silence. A lot has been going on behind the scenes. Positive, alhamdulillah. But we're back and we're ready to go. So, Dr. Khalid, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakallah. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yes, alhamdulillah. And
Yeah.
as usual, we'll be touching upon subjects and looking at them from perspectives and angles, classically, contemporarily, and trying to interrogate them from perspectives that may not have been looked at in the detail that it requires, or hasn't been addressed in more mainstream channels, as we like to do. Mashallah. And that's not the reason for this Doctor's Lab. I think we, as you know, Khalid, we want to look at aspects of our deen, and look at them from a perspective of authenticity, whilst also challenging sometimes the context in which we're understanding or applying some of these elements of our deen, mashallah, tabarakallah. So today, I think the title, as the audience can see, physical and ideological war. Okay, there are risks to them. There are effects, adverse and otherwise, regarding them. But I think that one of the things that we always focus on, or the world has us focus on, or the thing that is much more immediate to us, is the physical warfare. When we look across at previous wars, existing wars, we look at Russia now invading Ukraine, and we see extensive media coverage in a way that would only happen within a Western imperial white context, because we don't see the same attention being given when it's the Muslims, when it's black and brown people. When, if you were to close your eyes and mute the word Ukrainian and replace it with Palestinian, Uyghur, you name them, Kashmiri, Rohingya, Tigrayan, African countries, the narrative, the content is exactly the same. However, the disparities in focus on these latter ethnicities and nationalities that I've mentioned is stark. You've seen the blatant propaganda machines on both sides of the fence, pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, bringing stories of despair and heralding back to greater times, and heart-rendering stories of suffering. But if you changed that Ukrainian noun, proper noun, with others, it's exactly the same. But scant attention has been given in such a sustained way. And this is not the import of today's session. The point is, as I started with, the focus on physical war, the focus on economic aspects of war, as serious as they actually are, they're often predicated by a longer, more penetrative ideological warfare, which some are cognizant of, especially the ones who are the protagonists of this ideology. But some are unsuspecting, which is often the masses who are absorbing, consuming that ideological warfare without knowing that it's an ideological one. And as we go through this particular session today, I want to refer to Allama Ibn Baz, rahimahullah, when he spoke in the 60s, I think it was, or early 70s, about the ideological warfare, Ilhab al-Fikri. So do you share that with me, that the ideological warfare? Wa alaikum salam, Kira. Good to have you all back. Haida, mashallah, tabarakallah, brother Haida Qureshi, welcome. And Abdurrahman Mukhat. Do you share that sentiment with me, or that premise that ideological warfare, Ilhab al-Fikri, is much more penetrative and dangerous and devastating and longer lasting than the physical, economic warfare, etc.?
Yeah, that and in my studies and also in my research, those were conclusions that I more or less came up came to as well, because as you've already said, the lasting effect of when you have a man's ideas and you have a man's soul, you no longer need to enslave him. And this is kind of the with the colonial mindset and um what has devastated nations, and left a footprint on the ideas of many indigenous communities and people. So no doubt ideological warfare, the controlling of ideas and terrorizing with ideas is devastating, and it can last for generations, whereas perhaps from physical conflicts, some of those wounds will go away in a generation or two. So no doubt. And what's very interesting is the fact, because I actually didn't know where this discussion was going to go, and so uh, since we kind of came to this topic, on short notice, and it's interesting, in your introduction, you and I've had no discussion about this topic, that you were basically saying exactly what I wanted to say, especially relating to the Ukraine situation. And so I'll just reiterate, because this is our platform where this narrative is not being discussed, that basically the Western powers, they're controlling the narrative, and the world is in uproar, and you see it reflected in policy. For example, in the US and Canada, they're opening up to Ukrainians. It's the Ukrainian refugees and so forth. Now, I'm not knocking anyone who's suffering from war, and that's not the point. But the point is kind of the Western hypocrisy, the controlling of the narrative, so they will open the borders around the world for foreign fighters to go fight Russians and this and that and the other. But there's no way, when it was for Bosnia, when it's for Afghanistan, when it's anything like this, it's terrorism, it's unacceptable. Well, where is this contradiction? Oh, and we obviously know ISIS and stuff, and we're not with that. But again, we see the hypocrisy. But yet the UK allowed British citizens to go fight ISIS. So there's again, it shows the hypocrisy. And when you have the biggest muscles, you can control the narrative. That's just the reality. So they can, all this hypocrisy, but they don't talk about the I watched an interesting clip of he was African American, and he was talking about all the abandoned mixed children in Ukraine,
Right.
that
I
their
saw that.
mothers and their fathers, maybe they're fathered by West Africans predominantly and so forth, that married Ukrainian wives or Ukrainian girlfriends or whatever, and the mothers don't want to have anything to do with them, and they're being abandoned, but they don't talk about that in the media. Instead, the mainstream media, countless clips have been compiled as well, where they're
Yeah.
saying things like, oh, I never thought this would happen in Europe. Oh my gosh. Oh, these poor blue-eyed, is that right?
Blonde.
Blue-eyed, blonde-haired children. This is just devastating. But if it were brown, darker skin, it's expected. In fact, some of the media pundits have even said that too, on national broadcast, broadcasting, saying things like, we never expect this. This isn't Somalia, and this isn't Afghanistan, and this isn't Syria. We never expected this in our in Europe. So we see this, and it's just another slap in the face from the colonial mindset and, unfortunately, the white supremacist ideology. Even people who don't think of it like that. Like, I deal with it on a daily basis, and I'm one who's very much not into really going into these matters so much. I'm more focused on, but it amazes me. And I'll just give you an example. And I know we're a little off topic, but we're on topic and we're off topic. And I work with a Mexican American guy. He's my work colleague, and he's totally, what I would say, he's kind of assimilated, and he sort of distanced himself from Mexican culture, but yet he's very, entrenched as well.
Right.
Super pro Trump, hates the left, hates Democrats, like is a die, a very, he pushes propaganda daily and films, Hillary and this and that and the other, and the way they've destroyed the Democrats were the slave thing, and whatever truth lies in there, we're not going to get into that. But the point is I've heard him say things like that, more or less the Mexicans and other, African Americans, as far as the slave trade, as far as this, like, it's almost as if they were done a favor. They were done a favor because they wouldn't have these great freedoms as American citizens now. And they wouldn't have these, being in the greatest country in the world, and the freedom and democracy and all this stuff. It's amazing. The justification of colonialism, as if the end result. Now, good may come from great evil. Okay, good may come from great evil. Those are side products. But the justification, it just shows, a great sickness. And there's also this sense of cultural superiority. And he props up whiteness. It amazes me, the discussions we have on a daily basis, and how he is firmly a conquered mind. So going back to our topic, this is the complexity of the colonial mindset, that ideological warfare. Sartre, the French philosopher, he said, when he talked about colonialism in Africa, he said, we're proud and we want to, in the French colonies, to produce little brown Frenchmen. This is a famous, quote of his, because then they've already got your mind. And Malcolm talked about this as well. Once they have your mind, and as he talked about the house Negro and the field Negro, or what have you, that, you've already got his mind and his heart. So then when the master is sick, of course, the field Negro, it's even more, he feels the sickness more than the master. Exactly. Because his mind is thoroughly conquered. So ideological warfare is very, very powerful. And that's what I mean, the narrative. So then now we have our social media narrative, YouTube, all the social media. If you were to put something, even a slightly different perspective of what's going on in Russia, Ukraine and so forth, it will be censored. It will be hate speech. You'll be banned. You're kicked off Twitter. It's so powerful, the media outlets now, that they control. They could shut all this down if they decided, hey, if StreamYard,
everything you've highlighted is exactly the point. And this is why we need to look at this. Ideological warfare doesn't take place over weeks, months. It can take place over centuries, and you've given a classic example with the colonial mindset and the fact that there are those who were colonized. Their our forefathers were colonized, and this was the plan from the outset. From the outset, as you've highlighted, this French statement, we want this little brown Frenchman. We look across Africa, and we have francophones and anglophone countries. We see in one country very recently that there's internecine warfare between the anglophone sections and the francophone sections, and they're both they're African, of the same, maybe not tribal, because we see, like for Nigeria, for example, 550 ethnicities, Tanzania 150 plus
Ethiopia.
Yeah, so but we see the discord, the civil strife, the divisions are not on these tribal elements. In some cases, it's on Anglophone, Francophone, which were imposed languages from the colonies and the result of colonization. So that ideological warfare has penetrated generationally. And as Muslims, we know about this when we read um, in the annals of history, when we read what the ulama are saying, when we understand what was happening in the process of the revelation coming across Meccan society and changing an entire landscape with regards to the implementation of Tawheed. And as we know, Tawheed is the ultimate. So ideological warfare has been in place prior to Islam, since Islam in the advent of Islam, and you'll see that more often than not, ordinarily, the tactics and the weaponry points towards Tawheed more than anything else.
Mm.
Every society that is antithetical to the message of Islam and Islam itself, we'll see that that's when there's a uniting, a unification of ideology, ideological warfare, economic systems, social systems, religions against this one entity. And I don't want to call it entity, this faith, should I say. So, what is important to note here, while we are focusing on the physical elements of warfare, we need to look beneath that and see how we've arrived at where we were today. So, for example, let's look at when Russia was predominant and it was the Soviet Soviet Union, USSR, and the Cold War was between them and America. We know that NATO was established and member states started growing and affording membership or being afforded membership under NATO. But NATO's plans are and were and continue to be imperialistic, expansionist, hegemonic. And part of the reason we're seeing what we're seeing today is because NATO did not maintain the agreement with the Soviet Union to not expand into that region after the Soviet Union reacted to NATO many decades ago and formed their own union, what was known then as the Warsaw Pact, in response to NATO. So if NATO were going to have member states there, and if one country was attacked, they would all go to war for that country. Then USSR did the same thing with the surrounding former Soviet Union societies. But because of where it was going to, because you could have two entities going to war and resulting in possible nuclear war, there were diplomacy was implemented at very high levels, very intense levels, and USSR agreed. One of the presidents, we will dismantle the Warsaw Pact with the undertaking that you will not expand in this region, and you will also disband NATO. That hasn't happened. And if you go back and look at some of Putin's statements previously, he keeps speaking about that, leading to where we are today. Now, this is not in favor of Putin. Putin has done no favors to the Muslims. Look at what they did, the false flags that they raised by bombing their own people prior to entering and obliterating Chechnya, what they did to Grozny. They got beaten in Afghanistan.
No.
What they're doing in Syria. Let's not talk about ISIS, what they're doing to those who were legitimately opposing Assad. And the tactics of complete annihilation of cities and people, they've taken that tactic from Syria and they're now using it in the Ukraine. You can see the parallel and similarities that are taking place there. So again, why am I mentioning all of this now? Because there is an ideology beneath this. This propaganda that is being pushed by the West in support of Ukraine, there is an ideology underlying all of this. We hear similar statements now that we cannot be dependent on Russian oil, Russian gas. Let's go back post 9/11. And we heard the same thing in your Congress, that we cannot be dependent on Saudi oil, Saudi gas.
Mm-hmm.
The difference was now with regards to that Arab commodity of gas and oil compared to the Russian Caucasian commodity of gas and oil, is that they know they had the military might and alliance. They have it now, but they did not fear Saddam Hussein. They did not fear the Arab leaders. They did not consider them significant a threat enough to embark on diplomacy and sanctions. Instead, we saw them drum up this lie, George W. Bush, weapons of mass destruction. And today, 19th of March, 2022, 19 years ago to the day, 20th of March 2003, they invaded Iraq. 20 years, 19 years to the day. Today was the day, 20th of March 2003.
Wow.
So we see the hypocrisy in that no consideration to the sovereign state of Iraq and its people, and they invaded. But we see what's good for the goose is not good for the gander, because they have not used the same rule book to go into Russia, to go against Russia. Why? Two reasons. The military might, economic might of Russia.
Obviously, yeah.
And they're Caucasian. Let's be frank. And they're Caucasian. Okay. So there's a caution on that side. The ideological warfare that they've been trying to put under the carpet, Russia has been more aware of and more resilient to, and they made the move. They moved first. It was them who said, we're going to move. Let's see who's going to blink first. So we are seeing ideological warfare culminating in the physical warfare that we're actually witnessing at the moment. And I want to read something from Sheikh Ibn Baz. We're talking at the time, so from 19, from let's say we're talking 25, 26 years ago. He was asked this question: what, in your opinion, is the definition of al-Ghazwa al-Fikri, the ideological attack? And Sheikh Ibn Baz answered, ideological warfare is a modern term which refers to a set of efforts in which a nation engages in order to conquer or influence another nation, so that the attacked nation takes a particular course of direction. It's far more serious than military warfare, since it aims at secrecy, seeking to achieve subtle objectives initially, so that the attacked nation does not perceive it, thereby falling victim to it. The eventual result of this onslaught is that this nation becomes sick in mind and sense, loving what the enemy wants it to love and hating what the enemy wants it to hate. This is an aspect of Baz's speech about Ghazwat al-Fikri, the ideological warfare. Well, consider these particular aspects. There's more, and I will go into more of this speech a little bit later on. But we have to look at that insofar as it affects us as Muslims. Because we've got Muslims, I saw some British Muslims going over to fight in Ukraine. We see the Chechen aspect of Russia, Chechens preparing to go and fight in the Ukraine. Now, the whole thing of Wala wal Bara comes in at some point. Maybe they're obliged because of what happened previously and how their region was decimated by the Russian army. But we have to ask ourselves, have we become, like this individual you described, have we become so affected and infused with the disease that has been injected into our minds and our souls that we no longer discern how we should be in situations like these? We are seeing the physical warfare, and we've got the knee-jerk reaction. This is terrible. It shouldn't be happening. Something's got to be done about it. That's all well and good. But do we know what that was predicated by? Do we know the context of what's taking place now? And should we be taking sides saying we're pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian? No. What we should be doing, as we've mentioned many times before, Brother Khalid, is that we stand in support of oppressed peoples. But then we have to determine how we support oppressed peoples. And if it's from the 3 levels, is it from speaking with our tongue? Is it writing about it? But what we certainly mustn't do is confuse that those who are in the warfare at the moment, neither side have ever or will ever have the interest of Tawheed and Muslims in mind. That doesn't mean abstain, but we need to know that when we're looking at we've got to be on this side or that side, you needn't be on either side in some instances. We see in Surah Al-Rum when Allah says the Romans will be successful, and how the response of the Muslims will be in that particular context. Strategy is required. Strategic thinking and understanding and comprehension is required in these particular circumstances.
Absolutely. Al-Wala wal-Bara, takes has a huge role. And that's the problem, is most Muslims, especially in the West, we have so many various allegiances and alliances, and a lot of it, it's not based on any Islamic principles or Islamic knowledge. We don't give precedence to our Islamic knowledge, our Islamic development. So it amazes me that Muslims from the West, it doesn't amaze me, but it's still shocking when you hear it, that they're saying they're going to go make jihad fi sabilillah or whatever like this with the Ukrainians, and that they're going to go, but they've done nothing. They haven't even uttered a word on behalf of what happens in Philistine daily, and the oppressions and the onslaught of Zionism, and the blatant and hypocrisy of the West, and the willingness to discard all their own statutes and their own laws and their own world, balance of powers, and all of those things, that they're willing to flaunt that when it comes to their interest, and the politics and so forth. So the hypocrisy will not cease. Right. And this ties into a lot of the things that we've talked about when we talked about Hijrah, and we talked about a bit about, loving and hating for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your allegiance. Right. There's no way a Muslim in the UK, in Birmingham, should be getting on a flight thinking he's going to go do anything that has anything to do with Islam, in Ukraine. Right. And in fact, we'll find that these same Ukrainians, as we said, may Allah guide us and guide them. And again, we don't take away anything from innocent lives and so forth. But a lot of those people, as we've seen the countless Africans and Indians and Asians and others trying to flee the country, and the racism that has been, the racism that they experience, and that could cost them their lives. No, you can't get on the plane. Where's your ID? No, get in the back. No, it may cost you your life. So we just see a hypocrisy, and this becomes this has to do a lot with a lack of our Islamic identity. We'll have Muslims, getting on the podium. Hey, let's. This is on behalf of Ukraine, but they won't utter a word for the Rohingya, or maybe they will too on the side, and they'll do this, but they don't. All the other conflicts and all the other travesties that we witness daily, whether that's Yemen, whether that's, what have you, or lesser known conflicts, especially all over Africa, and a lot of times involving Muslim peoples, they don't care. Their life is not considered. Yeah,
Yes.
it's not considered as valuable. This is just the reality. A lot of people, they look at that and they don't want to admit it, but if they see a black child suffering and they see a white child, it just doesn't have the same value for them. A lot of
Right.
people, it really does not have the same value. And so these are real things that we have to contend with. And I think, again, that's why for myself, I have hardly engaged in this conflict. I haven't watched hardly any full news clips or anything about Ukraine, but I listen to the people, and I listen to people, and people ask, I'm doing a lecture about Tawheed, and people are, well, what do you think said about Ukraine? What do you think? I say, what is there to think about Ukraine? We don't like anyone being oppressed and this and that and the other. But do you know the full story? Do you know the background? Most people are not educated. They just jump on the wagon. I've had people that are incarcerated that I've talked to recently saying if I could get out right now and they gave me such and such rifle, I would go to Ukraine. I said, oh, okay, interesting. Why? Why is that? Oh, this and that and the other and blah, 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 blah. And, people, and my thing is the narrative is totally, it's so interesting that in democratic societies, those same things happen as they would in a communist society and so forth. The controlling of the narrative, we could talk about it in so many things. The vaccine. Now, I'll just say it right now. I'm unvaccinated and I'm pretty much anti-vaccinated with this corona thing. And it's crazy. It's crazy. The narrative, if you can't even, on Facebook, they'll shut you down if you have a different perspective as a medical physician, as someone who's looked at the data and looked at the side effects of people with vaccines. We have it on a micro level in our family. We have it on a macro level in people dying and, young kids. Oh, it's the stress of the economy opening. That's what's killing them after being vaccinated. It's not it has nothing to do with the vaccination. That's another point. But my point is the narrative. And one thing I've really analyzed in working with my colleague with all his books, leftism and this and that and the other, and he's got things, interesting things anyway. But one thing you will see is that leftist progressive onslaught, it's so powerful that how much they claim to be against fascism and against this, but they want a total control. How many people got up in the news and said, I think non-vaxxers should be, they should be isolated in society, or they should have this, they should have certain cards, they should be, some to even extreme statements, they should be given a sickness or, crazy stuff. They should be jailed. They are harming us all as a society. This is that same, it all ties in together with controlling the narrative, with the propaganda, with the, so my thing in general, as a big overall take, is that the people of Tawheed need to step up to the plate and be using the social media and doing lectures and doing durus. And it's not, I'm talking about Ukraine, but I'm talking about Aqidah. And because the people, if it wasn't for the weakness in their Aqidah, how could a Muslim that really has, studies anything about Islam and Tawheed and even the history of Islam, think about getting on a plane and going to a conflict between two disbelieving parties, but they have no love and no anything for other believers. So it shows you that really, I honestly believe, and people don't want to accept that, but Tawheed is, it comes back to that. And I don't say again, it's, as we've talked about, it's about being practical. It's about, but these principles that we're teaching and that we're, this usul of the foundation principles of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, they give you a remedy and a way of navigating for all time. Okay, I don't say that, yes, I'm going to read this book and all of a sudden I know the answer for Ukraine and all of a sudden I know the answer for the Rohingya. No, but it gives you it gives you an analysis, as Imam bin Baz, which a lot of the people of Hizbiyah, they'll say, oh, those Salafis, they don't know about a fiqh waqi, they don't know about contemporary issues, they don't know. Look at what that great Imam said, which was so relevant in addressing and giving you a minhaj, a methodology for dealing with this. I don't, you don't see me, let me say one thing. You don't see me getting excited about Ukraine. I haven't done, I wanted to do some videos that I know would have caused some controversy, or at least spank Muslims who want to think about that they've got to march and we've got to show our solidarity with Ukraine and stuff. And as my beloved Habib, I just got to put it out there. That's my boy right there, my closest in the dunya, Saber, who just had the comment about the LGBTQWXYZ community and how the leftists put that in your face, shove it down your throat. It's not enough that in these democratic societies that they can say, hey, you know, yes, okay, let's have fair rights, let's have good treatment, no hate speech, no harming people. Okay, that's not enough. They want to put it in your face. It's got to be in the commercial, 2 women kissing. It's got to be a transvestite on the soap commercial. You know, oh, it's okay. Give your children a choice. It's in your face. It's down your throat. That's ideological warfare. And that's an assault on your Aqidah. It's an assault on your methodology. It's assault on your Islam. So we are battling things on many fronts. Ukraine, I never give, I can't say, and I'm, you know, in the political science, that was my major. I haven't given anything because I'm focused on what I need to. Ramadan's coming up, making dua for those Muslims, not forgetting Ahl Yemen, not forgetting Ahl Islam. These things are boiling over, and we see the slaps in the face for those of us that are Western Muslims and African American. We see the slaps from various levels, and you as a you know, British, whatever, Caribbean Muslim, that that you know, you feel the slaps in the face on many fronts. Let me give you one last micro thing. We just got something. The American embassy is going to waive for the refugees, for the Ukrainian refugees, to get them into, I saw the document just yesterday, that they're going to waive it for them to just easily get passage into America. And I'm sure the same thing is happening in Canada and possibly the UK. Make it easy for them. Oh, we know this sickness. Oh, all of a sudden the virus isn't so important. And what about all those other people suffering? What about the Africans on the border coming in? And I'm not for them necessarily being letting in, coming all the way from Gambia and coming through Mexico, but the way they were, the sheriffs, and they're rounding them up with lassos. I mean, it reminded me, you know, it's crazy. It's crazy. So the hypocrisy we see for the countries that we pay money in as our taxes, they're taking a lot of tax dollars out of my paycheck. We see this. We are a part of that. And that is part of the argument of what I talked about before, of why Hijra and these things are, you know, and at least kind of limiting your engagement in some of the aspects of society, because they're never going to accept from you, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, the Yahud and Nasara. They're never, I don't care how many times they stand with you in the masjid because the masjid got burnt down, or the masjid had a car ram into it, like we had in Seattle just recently. So the governor comes out and all the people, but you better be skeptical, because once you let your guard down, you'll see that then you've got to have a transvestite, transgender speaker in there, in the masjid, on the musalla. You got to let him lead the prayer. You know, this is the reality. Don't think it's far-fetched. So I'll turn it over to you, Doctor.
I can tell you've had your coffee this morning.
Yeah, I had it and I'm out right now. I didn't have time to make another one. I guess I've had enough.
No, mashallah, a lot in there. And you've addressed the brother, the points that you raised. I want to acknowledge what one of our brothers said as well. We do see, and to be fair and to place it in the scales, we see that one particular ethnicity and nation have always stood with the Palestinians, understanding their plight, and that has been the Irish, always. Based on what they've gone through. So AH is correct about.
Let's say a lot of African Americans as well.
Yeah, exactly, have stood with the Palestinians. But now coming back to this issue here, looking everything you've described with regards to the, I think we can call it liberal fascism. Okay, liberal fascism. What we're seeing, this progressiveness in pushing an agenda, yet disputing and opposing far right agendas, when in actuality they're flip sides of the same coin. But sticking with what Sheikh Ibn Baz has said, he continued about the nation or the people afflicted by this ideological warfare. And he said, the nation which is struck in this way does not even feel what has hit it or even what it is. That is why curing it becomes somewhat difficult. Muslims in general are subject to a great ideological warfare from nations of disbelief. The most severe and most serious of these onslaughts is the war of the Christian Crusaders, 2, the Zionist war, and 3, the communistic and atheistic war. The ideological attack is far more devastating than military warfare, as I've mentioned. Conquering the hearts and minds of a people is far more permanent than conquering lands. So while we're seeing and we've watched and seen physical wars where we've seen societies, borders encroached upon, and we've lamented and bewailed and bemoaned, we've seen the same in Palestine. The thing that has where we've taken our eye off the ball is in remedying the ideological warfare that predicated those physical wars that allowed that to happen in the first place. And this is where the malaise as a Muslim ummah has taken place amongst us. And we know there are hadith and we know there are ayat that point to this taking place. Now, Sheikh Ibn Baz went on and highlighted some of the areas with regards to that ideological warfare and the strategy, infusing Western values into our children, promoting Western languages. And I want to highlight that on promoting Western languages, some of us who moved out into the Muslim world came as a sort of counterbalance to that drive of languages. Because, for example, I was a director of ELS language centers, and that was from the not the Marine Corps, but it was a corps, military corps that said go into the Middle East and spread the language, because when you spread the language, you spread a culture. British Council, and right. Others. Council as well. I know them. That was their colonial mindset as well. So then some of us convert Muslims said, no, when we come, yes, we're going to teach English, but we're going to enable or attempt or endeavor to enable the students to navigate and utilize the language as a tool of dawah, a tool of awareness in that instance. So the drive of the West to promote its languages, because through that you can promote culture. The attempt to control educational curricula, we know that has been taking place over in the Muslim lands as well. The large number of Orientalists were studying our religion. And this is a very serious thing that we need to look at, Brother Khalid, because we see that there are Orientalists, non-Muslims, who are there to look at and unpack, unpick, and try to dismantle aspects and narratives of the faith, looking at ilm mustalah hadith and trying to, the sciences of hadith, and to try and diminish its position and its worth, even questioning the authenticity of the Quran, but speaking and learning about aspects of our deen more than Muslims. What are we seeing with apostasy at the moment at the hands of those who are causing doubt amongst the Muslim world? And it's none other than some of these Orientalists. So these 4 elements I've mentioned here are parts of the ideological attack. But I think it's really important. It's really important that we look back at particular aspects of prophetic guidance regarding what you said. As you said, it's Tawheed, Tawheed, Tawheed. But let's be very clear about this. This is Tawheed actualizing Tawheed, because that's how Islam spread initially. It wasn't an ideological warfare. It was an ideological cleansing of people, of societies. I want to repeat what I said. Tawheed is not an ideological warfare. It's an ideological cleansing of corruption, corrupt ideas, corrupt belief, corrupt practices. If you want to put it in layman's term, it is the ultimate and only vaccine to the diseases of the heart, the physical ailments, the mental and the psychological ailments. So we see the hadith here in Abu Dawood. The nations were about to invite one another and come upon you, just as those eating invite others to share a dish. Someone asked the Prophet ﷺ, will that be because we are few in number that day? The Prophet ﷺ replied, no. at the time you will be numerous, but you will be like froth, scum, like the froth scum carried by the wave.
Mm.
And Allah will remove the fear of you from the hearts of your enemies.
Mm.
Allah will indeed throw weakness, wahan, into your own hearts.
Mm.
So the Prophet ﷺ was asked, what is wahan? And as we know, Khalid, the Prophet ﷺ said, Hubbul dunya wal khara'itul maut.
No.
Love of this world and hatred for death.
Mm.
And when we look at that ideological effect of warfare that's been applied from all of these Western strategies, Western policies, communism, democracy as they're practicing it now, all of the capitalism, these are ideological tools that have diluted Muslim faith, distracted Muslims from where their focus should be, and caused us to sit as observers, not only to what is happening in the world, but is to what is happening to us. And that brings to mind the case when I think it was Genghis Khan, the Tatars or the Mongols, they were invading. There's a famous story where they were invading the lands and the Muslims were that weak and fearful of them that they just sat and waited to be slaughtered.
No.
They sat and waited to be slaughtered. And one of those who was doing the slaughtering was a female, and her sword had become blunt. And she told everyone, wait here, don't move. And she rode off to go and get a sharp sword, came back, found them waiting there, and slaughtered all of them. It's as though we are sitting, observing what is happening to us as Muslims in wherever we may be in the Western world. I'm talking specifically in this instance, and we are bystanders to our own demise for the simple reason that we will not refer to, delve back into, hold on to the rope of Allah, which is Tawheed.
Absolutely. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْتَسِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on, all of you steadfast to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do not divide. So, as you mentioned, our lack of holding on to the Quran, our lack of, people, I think the reality is, and it happens to many of us, that we take our Islam for granted. We think that it's sufficient. I'm a Muslim, okay, but I'll go out in the society. I do all these sins. I work as a banker. I deal with interest day and night, but I pray, and that's it. And that's your duty. But really, you can see, and as we're discussing, it just makes it clear for me the importance of Islamic knowledge, that learning and practicing that knowledge is imperative, because you can't make these changes on ignorance. And the changes won't happen for the ummah and without us being dragged into all of this madness and all these conflicts by protesting, by just giving a nice lecture and a feel-good medicine in the square in London or here and there. But rather, it is a constant practice, a constant engagement with renewing your aqidah, your creed. So that way you know and understand how to look at these issues, that you're not saying, yeah, you're right, Ukraine, I should probably go to Ukraine too. Oh, let me spend is my sadaqah going to be better spent in Ukraine, or is it better spent in Palestine or Afghanistan or Yemen? Well, there's a lot of organizations there in Syria and all this stuff. Let me just go ahead and support the Ukrainians, okay? Yeah, if you got extra money and you help and it's going to a good cause, la bas, but there's those who have precedence. So my thing is, by constantly renewing your faith, and this is one of the things I observe, what I believe still to this day, when I witness in Yemen, in places like this, and all the students of knowledge from around the world, that yes, they're not going back to be political actors necessarily. But when I see those hordes of Indonesians that are there, we're in Damaj and in all the Marakis of Sunnah, the places to study the book in the Sunnah, memorizing the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all the aspects of the Deen, and the Somalis and the Ethiopians and the Libyans and the people from around the world and all the Europeans. A lot of French used to come to Yemen, and of course Brits that came through and Americans, that they are emissaries of the Dawah to Tawheed, that they go back. Some of them went back and made positive influences around the world in their countries to be able to navigate these things, to teach, build institutions in those lands to help spread the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because really the revival of what the people before were upon is going to save us. As Imam Malik said, he said, La yaslah akhira hadhihi ummah illa bima salaha awwalaha. The later generations from this nation will not be rectified except for with what rectified the first. So it isn't because we need more political activism positions and more, we need to be more entrenched in the West as far as that, but we need more knowledge and practice and implementation and building the institutions and giving the people the correct creed so that they don't just fly and fold away when the next fitna and trial happens. Is it going to be, when something else happens in America, and it's done by a Muslim, a foolish Muslim or an ignorant Muslim or someone who's not even Muslim, but it has a Muslim name or whatever the case may be? Are you going to run and rush to assimilate and distance yourself from Islam? Or are you going to clarify things and still have a way of analyzing things and putting things in perspective? So, the job is continuous. And that's how I view a lot of those students of knowledge gaining those mashayikh, gaining those tools to navigate everything that comes up. Islam is giving you that, but it's not a passive thing. It's not just, oh, I'm a Muslim and that's it. And it's not just, oh, I studied for a little bit and that's it. It's constant. It's constant. I'm always learning and I'm teaching, just before we got on, and you got to be engaging and practicing.
What you're saying, there's a lot that I want to what you said is endorsed here. And I think we've got to look, because part of the reactionary thing we're seeing from the Muslims, when we saw what was happening in Syria, when we want to go and fight, as if we're ready to go and fight, but we weren't ready to do the other rudimentary aspects of our deen beforehand. And again, there's a narrative which you and I know, and I'm going to read this narrative, then I'm going to speak about what a sheikh said that reinforces what we're discussing here. And I'll mention that narration from the sheikh very shortly. But there's the narration where we see that Khabab ibn al-Arat complained. He said, we complained to Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam of the persecution of Muslims upon them, whilst the Prophet was sitting under the shade of the Kaaba on his cloak. And we said to the Prophet ﷺ, this is what they said. They besieged him. Will you not seek help for us? Would you call upon Allah for us? And the Prophet ﷺ replied, looked at them, said, amongst those before you, a believing man would have a hole dug for him, and he would be placed in it. Then a saw would be brought and placed upon his head, and it would be sawn in half. Yet that would not make him abandon his religion. And his body would be torn with iron combs, the flesh being ripped from his bones and his nerves being removed. Yet that would not make him give up his religion. And the Prophet ﷺ continued, by Allah, this deen will prevail until a rider will travel from Sana'a to Hadramaut, not fearing except Allah and the wolf as regards his sheep. Here's the key words now. But you people are impatient. This is what the Prophet ﷺ was saying to the Sahaba. A tremendous narration that we really need to consider when we are, as you said, the reactionary. Why aren't we doing anything? Salafis, you're just sitting down, you're just talking, ilm, knowledge, this is all you talk about. And speaking to that point, a conference in Brixton in the 90s, we had a visiting sheikh from Europe, and originally Syrian, Sheikh Abu Said Ahmed Salam. And he was asked this question by someone inclined towards the Takfiri Dawah. We used to, everyone should come, the Shuyukh here, come and speak. And it was an Arab brother, North African individual, I believe. And he asked the sheikh this question, and listen to the ilm I've mentioned this before in previous podcasts I've done, but not in this session.
Mm.
The individual asked in the question and answers, should we consider what the Ummah is going through now as a fitna? Is it the methodology of the Salaf to sit down as we are doing now and not participate in that, meaning the jihad, what they consider jihad? This is what the Sheikh said, Khalid. I don't know if you've heard this, but it's a tremendous response. The Sheikh answered saying, the following is a principle that you can take and apply for this type of question. Any fighting which you see taking place and the scholars have not given a fatwa that such fighting is jihad and is legislated in the deen, then this fighting is to be considered to be fitna. In addition to this, whenever we find a group of people starting a war or participating in a military battle somewhere, but they do not have the ability to establish safety and security to the people, nor repel the advances of those who are over them, thereby increasing the fitna that the people were already in, then this is also to be considered a fitna. He went on to say, to ask the question, is it the methodology of the Salaf to sit down as we are doing now and not participate, is to suggest that everything in Islam is sitting down and not participating unless it be fighting and killing people. So if you're killing people, then you are on Islam. But if you are studying and doing other things, then this is to be described as sitting down and participating. As if it is not important for the Muslims to become aware of their deen and the other many issues that are of paramount importance to them. As if it's not important for the Muslims to know their Aqidah and it's about Sunnah. We need to understand that the war that is taking place right now is not a battle between human beings. In reality, it is a battle between truth and falsehood. So if our ummah does not know truth from falsehood, then inevitably it will fall into falsehood.
Subhanallah. Sahih. Absolutely.
This is knowledge, Khalid.
No.
This what we as Salafis get criticized for, but look at the knowledge that has emanated from that statement. And as you mentioned, the Imam Malik's famous statement, the latter part of this ummah will not be rectified except by that which we rectified the first part. And we know Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat 137.
No.
So if they believe in the like of that which you believe, the Sahaba, then they are rightly guided. How did the Sahaba believe? What did they hold on to? And when we come down to physical and ideological warfare, now with physical warfare as well, we know that there are ethics. Muslims adhere to ethics. When we look at what's taking place in some of the battlefields, the abuse of women and children, the damaging of buildings, the damaging of agriculture, and it was from Islam that these things have been prohibited. The killing of elderly. We know that Islam does not sanction this. So when we do not know about our deen, when we cannot stand with self-assuredness about these dictates, about these ethics religiously, then we're just sitting by the side and we are reacting to the propaganda just like everybody else is, without a basis of deen. And if we are saying we want to go and fight, it's because we're impatient. It's because we do not have the mizan, the correct scales in front of us with regards to the deen. The Prophet ﷺ said in that hadith, but you people, he was talking to the Sahaba, you people are impatient. And if the Prophet ﷺ said that about the Sahaba, how much more so us? Knowledge is required in matters like these. Knowledge is required with regards to the premise upon which we live, act, move, don't move. And I think that what we've established here, as we come up to the hour, and I think we can conclude on an earlier note in today, but and I'll hand over to you shortly. Ideological warfare is much more far-reaching. It's affected all of us collectively, but we need to check how much it's affected us individually, because some of us are still asleep and do not know that we've been affected by generations of ideological warfare, and the bitter fruit is amongst us, but we don't see it as bitter fruit now because it's so much, we've been inoculated against it. It's part of our DNA now, and we're passing it and transmitting it to our children. And look at the state of our children. Look at our children and how negative they are with regards to even our referencing of the deen.
Well, I understand.
So that ideological impact is the first port of call that we need to start looking at, not the secondary aspect, because we're looking at our physical environment, safety, and everything. We need to look at the ideological perspective first. When we look at Bosnia, the Balkans conflict, some of us were involved in helping on various levels of work there. The fact that the Bosnians were living side by side with their Croat Serbian neighbors, they were intermarried. And then when the strife, disputes, civil discord, war broke out, what happened? That Bosnian neighbor was told, you are Muslim, and they killed them. This literally happened.
Yeah.
The ethnic cleansing, that phrase that came out of this war, what they were doing, and I want people to be clear on this, they did such things. I saw the videos. I had colleagues over there at various levels. I went over there. But when you see videos with trays of testicles and penises of children and young men because they were castrated, and you see rape camps that were there, and we had some sisters have to come over who were brought over charitable wise, traumatized because there were rape camps, because the Serbians said we will impregnate them so that the children that are born are Serbian. That ideological warfare had seeped in generationally, and then when it came to the physical warfare, they were told, you are not among us and we are not among you. You are Muslim. It was literally like lambs to the slaughter.
No. Allah understand.
I will conclude with what I'm saying, that listening to what the Shiuk said here, this is a battle that is beyond the comprehension that we are having it confined to, and that it's being dictated and narrated to us. And we need to be upon a sure footing of Tawheed.
No.
We're even going to begin to comprehend what is required of us as Muslims in this life.
No, I don't have anything, any comments really to make that hasn't already been said. But again, it emphasizes the importance of being on a methodology, meaning that you have some tools and you're going in that same direction. It could seem slow. Others will bounce to the right. They'll bounce to the left. They'll get caught up in this and they'll get caught up in that. But it's so important to take things in stride based on ilm wa fiqh wa basira. And this, also relates to many of the conflicts when they happened that we've seen in the 90s, and it's probably been a trace throughout history. You'll see that the major scholars, a lot of times they will be silent, and a lot of the youth, they will rush. They need an answer. It happened yesterday. This happened. And I recall, this is true, after September 11th, I had the chance to ask Sheikh Saleh bin Fawzan, and he came to our university where I used to teach. And I sent the question up, and then someone asked by microphone, and, what is our position? But I remember at that time, the event, everything was just new. So letting the dust settle, getting the details, the mashayikh, especially the ulama, the major scholars, they study these issues. It isn't just like you rush, but people want an answer. They want an answer yesterday. So this is the reality, and this is the wisdom in the fiqh and the basira that you find, especially from the major scholars. They make darasa, they make tadris, they study masail, they study the issues, they study the contemporary events before they speak. They don't just rush, and they've already got a position, and they've already got this, as we see the youth, as we see even, unfortunately, many of the, even sometimes the, students of knowledge and others maybe speaking out of the place they should be in dealing with issues. So it's so important to have that patience, to have the ilm, the fiqh, and the basira, and to keep going in a straight path. It's a continuum. It's not something of just excitement. And I know a lot of these new Dawa pundits that we have around the world that are social media warriors and political activists and social activists, you know, that most of them, if not all of them, without knowledge about the deen, and speaking and protesting and rallies and getting excited, and the people love to follow them and they love to get behind them and support them and give them money and build institutions based on batil and falsehood. But that is not the progress for the ummah. That is not what is going to build our future generations on the correct aqidah, on the correct methodology, and the correct propagation of Islam. And so Allah will replace the people with a new people who will, you know, until the end of time. And as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, and I'll end with this: La tazal ta'ifatun min ummati zahirin ala al-haqq, la yadurruhum man khalafahum wala man khadhalahum hatta taqum as-sa'a. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, there won't cease to be a nation, a group from my nation that is on the truth. No one will harm them, and nor even if they differ with them, until the hour is established. Meaning, there's always going to be a party from Ahlul Sunnah that's going to be on the same methodology, no matter what the people call them medkhalis, the people call them this, the people call them this, they call them extremists, and they're always going to have new names. But Ahlul Sunnah is going to be on the same path, a same steady minhaj, a same steady methodology, calling to the book and the sunnah, exalting the book and the sunnah, practicing the book and the sunnah, illustrating and clarifying the book and the sunnah for the people, and giving that clarity and that fiqh and that basira so they can practice their deen. And that is, I firmly believe in this methodology. And that's what it seems consistent with what we see from the book of Allah and the sunnah of the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam, and the madhab, the minhaj, the methodology of the Salaf as-Salih ridwanullahi alayhim.
I think with that, Khalid, mashallah, I hope for those who have viewers and the regulars of you, the new ones of you, we do not shy away from talking about areas and aspects that are seldom spoken about, but from inshallah, of knowledge. This is very, very important. And this topic that we're speaking about, it's pertinent to today, but there's an ongoing challenge that is taking place. And yes, as Khalid mentioned, we are approaching Ramadan. And so not only do we want to increase the spiritual aspect of what we're doing, we need to increase our knowledge of this deen during that as well, so that our resolve can continue beyond Ramadan, inshallah. So let's not be excited solely by sloganistic reminders of Ramadan and everything. Let's really look at them and contemplate and apply, resolve to apply what we know and learn more with added vigor. Because what is going on today, for example, and I wanted to say this earlier and I mentioned it, even ourselves, we see blonde hair, blue eye, and we have this inferiority complex, some of us, like, oh, a white child suffering, my heart goes up, because many have been conditioned that whiteness is at that particular level. But hey, let me remind you of Aylan Kurdi, the young Syrian whose lifeless body was on the beach. And yet we see that they're offering the Channel Tunnel and ferries and train services to the Ukrainians. Have we been conditioned that much that due to the ethnicity of one, another doesn't count? Then we're not looking through from the lens of Islam and justice and ummatan wasat and being balanced. We're not looking through these lenses. We're looking through a lens of inferiority of who we are, what we are, where we come from. And we have to change that now.
No.
Inshallah.
Inshallah ta'ala. Barakallah fiqh, jazakallah khairan, Doctor. It was very insightful and a good reminder of how we need to focus our attention. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in this gathering, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all and protect us all and preserve us all and forgive us all and guide us all to the sawab. And may Allah ta'ala bless us to make it to Ramadan and fast the holy month of Ramadan and gain the maximum benefit during this holy month of Ramadan and come out as better believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.